Some nights, you never forget. Some moments, no matter how much you try to push them away, no matter how many times you tell yourself it wasn't real, it lingers. Like a shadow that won't leave. Like a whisper in the back of your mind that keeps replaying, over and over. That night was one of them. I used to believe that family was sacred. That there were certain lines, no matter how blurred things got, no matter how weak a moment made you feel, some lines you just don't cross. But life has a funny way of showing you that you don't really know yourself, not until you're standing at the edge of a choice you never thought you'd have to make. And once that line is crossed, ain't no going back. I wish I could say it was all some crazy misunderstanding. I wish I could say my mind was playing tricks on me. But the truth? The truth is a whole lot messier. And if I'm being honest with you, I still don't know how to make sense of it. I never thought my own flesh and blood would betray me like that. Never. But maybe the real betrayal was the one I let happen inside me. And if you've ever found yourself staring at a version of yourself you don't recognize, if you've ever had a moment that made you question everything, you're not alone. I need you to stay with me, listen to every detail, because by the end of this story, I need to know what you think. Would you have done things differently? Or was this just one of those moments life throws at you to see how weak you really are? Let's talk in the comments. And if you love deep, raw, true infidelity stories that make you question everything, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Trust me, this one's gonna stay with you. Now, let me take you back to the night it all started. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always this, lost. There was a time when I was happy, truly, deeply happy. Or at least, I thought I was. I was married for 8 years, and in the beginning, I believed I had everything I ever wanted. A home. A family. A man who once looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Or maybe he changed. Or maybe I did. The last 2 years of my marriage felt like I was living in someone else's life. Like I had become a background character in my own story. My husband? He was there, physically. But emotionally? Spiritually? In every way that mattered? He was gone. I could be standing right in front of him, talking, laughing, crying, and it was like I was invisible. Like I was just part of the furniture. He would nod. Say, mmm, give me half a glance before going right back to his phone, his work, the damn TV. And the bed? Cold. Not just physically, but emotionally, too. We slept next to each other like strangers, barely touching, barely speaking, barely existing together. I told myself it was just a phase. That life got in the way. That all married couples go through rough patches. But when those patches stretch from weeks to months to years, you start to wonder if the person lying next to you is even the same man you married. I tried. God knows, I tried. I tried to talk to him. I tried to make him see me again. I did my hair differently, wore his favorite perfume, even started dressing up just to sit in our own living room. And you know what he said? Where you going? That was it. Not even a compliment. Not even a second glance. After a while, I stopped trying. Because what's the point of screaming into a void when no one's listening? And that's when he moved in. My lil' brother. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved him. I still do. I always saw him as my baby brother, even though he was grown now. I practically raised him, looked out for him when no one else did. He was always the funny one, the charismatic one, the kind of person who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing in 5 minutes. But under all that charm was someone who carried his own wounds. He had been going through something. Some personal issues he didn't want to talk about. He needed a place to stay, and I didn't think twice about opening my doors to him. Family is family. At first, it was good. Having him around brought life back into the house. He was always cracking jokes, always had some wild story to tell. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel so alone. I didn't realize how much I missed being seen. With him, I wasn't just an afterthought. He actually listened when I spoke. He noticed things, small things that my own husband hadn't picked up on in years. "You changed your hair?" he asked one night, tilting his head as he looked at me. "Yeah," I said, caught off guard. "Looks nice on you." It was such a simple thing. Such an innocent thing. But my stomach flipped in a way I wasn't prepared for. And that should have been my first warning. The house itself had changed. It was like my husband and I lived in two different worlds. He was either working late or glued to his phone, barely acknowledging anything around him. And in that empty space he left behind, my little brother's presence grew stronger. We spent more time together. At first, it was just casual, like old times. Watching movies. Late-night talks in the kitchen while snacking on leftovers. But there was something in the air, something unspoken. Something I was too scared to name. There were moments, fleeting, quiet moments, where I'd catch him looking at me, and instead of looking away, he held my gaze. And the way he said my name, it was different. Softer. Intentional. I should have set boundaries. I should have recognized what was happening before it got too deep. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I felt wanted. And that feeling? That's the kind of thing that makes you forget right from wrong. Now, let me tell you about the night my lil bro crossed the line. It started with a normal night. Nothing special. Nothing different. Just another quiet evening in a house that had long forgotten what warmth felt like. My husband, as usual, wasn't home. He'd been coming home later and later, always with some excuse. Work ran late, had to meet a client, you know how it is. And at this point, I had stopped questioning it. I had stopped caring. The TV was on low, just background noise in a house that felt emptier than it should have. My lil brother was in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge like he always did, complaining about how we never had real food. "Y'all don't keep nothing good in here," he called out. I smirked, shaking my head from the couch. "Because we don't eat like teenagers. That's your problem. You need to enjoy life a little." The words stuck with me in a way they shouldn't have. A moment later, he walked into the living room, flopping onto the couch next to me with a bowl of cereal, way too comfortable like he owned the place. "What you watching?" he asked. "Nothing really." He glanced at me, tilting his head. "You okay?" I blinked. The question caught me off guard. No one asked me that anymore. "Yeah, why?" He shrugged. "You just seem, I don't know, off." I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "It's nothing. Just tired." He didn't look convinced. And for a split second, I saw something in his eyes, something like concern, like care, that I hadn't seen from a man in a long time. I looked away. It was nothing. But the air felt different. It was late, and we were alone, just the two of us, sitting on the couch, watching some random movie neither of us were really paying attention to. It was comfortable. Too comfortable. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, my body relaxed. I wasn't tense, wasn't thinking about the weight I always carried on my shoulders. The loneliness, the frustration, the feeling of being unseen, it wasn't there in that moment. And then, the conversation shifted. "You ever think about leaving?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned to him, caught off guard. "What?" He kept his eyes on the screen, his jaw tense, like he had been holding that question in for a while. "I just mean, you don't seem happy. Not with him." I swallowed. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "It's not that simple," I muttered, shifting on the couch. "Why not?" "Because marriage isn't some game. You don't just walk away. Even if it's killing you?" His voice was quiet. Too quiet. I let out a breath, shaking my head. "I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore." He was watching me now, really watching me, like he was trying to read every thought I wasn't saying out loud. "I just hate seeing you like this," he murmured. I swallowed hard, looking away. The way he was looking at me, it felt dangerous. Then it happened. So small, so insignificant, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. He reached over, brushing a stray curl from my face. Just the lightest touch. But my whole body froze. I don't know if he realized it, if he felt the way my breath caught, the way my fingers clenched against the couch cushion. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was the problem. I turned to him, my heart hammering in my chest. "What are you doing?" For a second, he didn't answer. His eyes just searched mine, like he was looking for something. And then, just like that, he pulled his hand back, clearing his throat like it was nothing. You had something in your hair, he said. A lie. We both knew it. But I nodded anyway, pretending to believe it, pretending my skin wasn't still burning from the touch. It was nothing, right? The rest of the night went on like normal. Or at least, we pretended it did. The movie ended, he yawned, stretched, said he was heading to bed. But the way he looked at me before he left the room, it lingered. Like he was waiting for something. Like he was waiting for me to say something. And when he disappeared down the hallway, when I was finally alone again, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was nothing. It was just a touch. It didn't mean anything, right? But later that night, when I lay in bed next to a man who hadn't touched me in months, a man who was snoring softly, oblivious to the storm inside me, I felt it. Something had changed. And once that change starts, there's no stopping it. I barely slept that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my husband's slow, steady breathing beside me. I kept replaying the moment in my head, his hand in my hair, the way his eyes lingered, the weight of that silence between us. And the worst part? It wasn't the moment itself that haunted me. It was how it made me feel. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it, that I was imagining things, looking for something that wasn't there. Because what was the alternative? That I wanted it? That I had been waiting for something, anything, to remind me that I was still alive? No, that wasn't it. It couldn't be. I turned onto my side, facing my husband's back. He was completely unaware, lost in his dreams, as if nothing in this house had shifted. But I had shifted. And once that thought settled into my mind, I couldn't get rid of it. The next morning, I told myself to act normal. To push the night before into a box, lock it up, throw away the key. But it wasn't that simple. Because the moment I walked into the kitchen, and he was standing there, shirtless, making coffee, acting like nothing had changed, I felt it. The shift. The weight in the air. He turned when he heard me, his eyes locking onto mine for just a second too long. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I mumbled, moving toward the fridge, suddenly hyper-aware of every single thing I was doing. The way I moved. The way I stood. The way his eyes felt like they were still on me even when I wasn't looking at him. I pulled out the milk, tried to keep my hands steady as I poured myself a glass. But when I turned back around, he was right there. Close. Too close. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. My breath caught in my throat. Yeah, I lied. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Because the moment was already stretching too thin, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And then he smiled, that smile, the one that had always been innocent, playful, brotherly. But it didn't feel brotherly now. And I hated that I knew the difference. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. I tried to tell myself that I was being dramatic, that I was making something out of nothing. He was just being affectionate, right? Just being himself. And maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was the one reading into things. Maybe I was projecting because I had spent too many nights feeling invisible. But then came the moments I couldn't explain away. The small, fleeting touches. His hand on the small of my back as he moved past me in the kitchen. A shoulder brush that neither of us stepped away from. The way his eyes lingered just a second too long when he thought I wasn't paying attention. And then there was the teasing. The playful remarks that should have meant nothing but felt like everything. "Damn, I don't remember you being this funny. You should smile more, you know. It looks good on you. You ever gonna let loose, or are you always this serious?" It was harmless. It was stupid. So why did it feel like a match being struck inside me every time? The breaking point came in the smallest, most insignificant way. I had been in the living room, standing on my toes, trying to reach something on the top shelf. I barely even noticed him walk in. But before I could grab it, before I could even react, his hands were on my waist. Steady. Strong. Familiar. He reached over me, grabbed what I was looking for, and then he didn't move. Not right away. His hands stayed where they were, fingertips pressing just a little too firmly. And I should have stepped away. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, anything to break the moment. But I didn't. Because in that split second, something inside me craved it. The warmth, the touch, the attention. It was stupid. So stupid. Because it wasn't cheating. Not yet. But God help me, it was close. That night, I stood in the bathroom, gripping the sink, staring at my own reflection. I looked the same. I was still me. Still the same wife, the same woman, the same person I had been before any of this started. But something was different. Something inside me had cracked open, and I didn't know how to close it again. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to turn back. Would you have stopped it there? Would you have walked away? Because looking back, I wish I had. But I didn't. That's when everything truly fell apart. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It wasn't some grand, dramatic moment where everything fell apart in an instant. No, it happened in the small things. The little moments that seemed so harmless until they weren't. Until they became something I couldn't ignore. Until I stopped wanting to ignore them. It started with something simple. I was in the kitchen, struggling to fix the garbage disposal. It had been broken for weeks, and my husband? He always said he'd get around to it. But like everything else in our marriage, he never did. So there I was, sleeves pushed up, frustration mounting, cursing under my breath as I tried to figure out what the hell was wrong with it. And then, he was there. Need some help. I looked up, startled, and there he was, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with that smirk of his. I got it, I muttered, wiping my hands on a dish towel. He didn't listen. He never did. Instead, he knelt down next to me, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the warmth of his body just inches away. "You're doing it wrong," he said, grinning. "Oh, and you're an expert now?" I shot back, rolling my eyes. He just chuckled. "Move over. Let me show you." And I did. I don't know why, but I did. I scooted back, letting him take my place, watching as he worked, his hands moving with ease, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was such a small thing. But when he looked up at me, a triumphant grin on his face as the garbage disposal roared back to life, something shifted. "Told you," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. All right, you win," I laughed, shaking my head. "Guess I owe you one." He tilted his head, still watching me. "Yeah? I'll remember that." And for a second, just a second, neither of us moved. The touches became more frequent after that. Small, subtle, innocent. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. A hand on my lower back when he moved past me in the hallway. A lingering touch when he handed me something. A brush of fingers that neither of us pulled away from fast enough. And every time, my stomach would flip, my breath would hitch, just for a moment. Just long enough for me to feel it. Something growing. Something neither of us wanted to name. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late. My husband was wherever he always was. It was just me and him. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the TV, neither of us really watching it. I don't even remember how it started. One minute, we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, just talking. And the next, we weren't. "You ever think about what your life would be like if you made different choices?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet. I turned to him, confused. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long moment before exhaling. "I just mean, you're not happy," he said finally. I stiffened. "That's not, you don't have to lie to me," he interrupted, turning his head to look at me. And the way he said it, the way he looked at me, it was like he already knew the truth. Like he had always known. I swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I made a commitment. Because I took vows. Because you're scared," he cut me off. Silence. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because he was right. I was scared. Scared to admit the truth. Scared to face what I had been feeling for so long. "You deserve to be happy," he murmured. I let out a shaky breath. "It's not that easy." He didn't answer right away. And then, he said the words that shattered everything. "I see you, you know." I blinked, my heart hammering. "What?" I whispered. He sat up, his gaze locked onto mine, unwavering. I see you, he repeated. I see how hard you try. I see how much you give. I see how much it hurts you when he doesn't notice. When he doesn't appreciate you. When he treats you like you're just there. I couldn't breathe. Because he wasn't wrong. He had been watching me. Not in a way that felt intrusive, not in a way that felt wrong. In a way that made me feel more seen than I had in years. And for the first time, I let myself feel it. The loneliness. The ache. The desperation for someone, anyone, to just look at me and really, truly see me. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You should go to bed, I whispered, my voice barely steady. He hesitated. And then, after what felt like forever, he nodded. Good night, he said softly. And then he was gone. But the damage was already done. Because in that moment, something inside me had cracked open. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to close it again. Would you have stopped it there? Would you have turned away before it went too far? Because looking back, I wish I had. But I didn't. And that's when we finally crossed the line. Some things you can't come back from. Some lines, once you cross them, you can never pretend they weren't there in the first place. And that night? That was the night we crossed it. It was late. Later than it should have been. The house was dark, the only glow coming from the small lamp in the living room. My husband was gone, working late again, or so he said. The silence felt different that night. Thicker. Heavier. Like the weight of something neither of us wanted to acknowledge had finally become too much to ignore. I wasn't supposed to be awake. I should have been in bed. But I wasn't. Neither was he. I found him in the kitchen, standing by the sink, staring out into the night like he was searching for something. Or maybe waiting. I should have turned around. I should have gone back upstairs and pretended I never saw him. But I didn't. Instead, I walked in, barefoot, the tile cool against my skin. He heard me, but didn't turn around right away. He just let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Can't sleep? I asked. Guess not, he murmured. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Something on your mind? This time, he did turn. And the way he looked at me. It wasn't the way a little brother should look at his sister. It wasn't the way anyone should look at someone they were supposed to keep at a distance. It was quiet. Intense. Undeniable. You know what's on my mind, he said softly. I felt my breath catch. Because I did know. I had known for weeks. Maybe longer. I swallowed, shaking my head. We can't do this, I whispered. Then tell me to stop, he said. The words hung between us, waiting. I should have said it. I should have told him to walk away. I should have reminded him of who we were, of what this was, of all the reasons why this was wrong. But I didn't. Because I didn't want to. He stepped closer. Slowly. Like he was giving me time to pull away, to put space between us. But I didn't move. His hand reached up, hesitant, waiting, until his fingers brushed my cheek. I felt my whole body tense, every nerve in me screaming, every instinct battling itself. This was it. This was the moment. The line was right there. And then he leaned in. I felt his breath first, warm and unsteady. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I should have stepped back. I should have broken the moment before it became something I could never take back. But instead, I closed my eyes. The first touch was barely there. A whisper of skin. A hesitation. Like he was giving me one last chance to stop. And for a split second, I almost did. I almost opened my mouth to say something, to end it, to walk away, to fix this before it broke into something unrecognizable. But then, his lips pressed against mine. And I didn't stop it. I don't know how long it lasted. A second. A minute. An eternity. I just know that, for the first time in years, I felt wanted. Like I wasn't invisible. Like I wasn't an afterthought. Like someone had been waiting for me, just me. But then it happened. A noise. A vibration. A break in the silence. I gasped, yanking myself back as reality slammed into me. My phone, sitting on the counter, lit up. A message. From my husband. On my way home. Be there in 10. My stomach dropped. My breath came out in short, Shallow bursts as the weight of what I had just done came crashing down. I turned to him, panic surging through me, but he didn't look panicked. He just looked at me. Like he already knew. Like he had already made peace with the choice we'd made. But I hadn't. I wasn't ready. I have to go, I stammered, my hands shaking. I turned before he could say anything, before I could see whatever was in his eyes. And as I ran up the stairs, my heart still hammering, my lips still tingling, my mind still reeling, I knew everything had changed. And there was no going back. Some mistakes you regret the moment you make them. Some take a little longer. But this was a mistake I'd never recover from. Guilt has a way of creeping in when the world is quiet. That night, after I ran upstairs, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my own reflection like I was looking at a stranger. My lips were still warm. My hands were still shaking. I wanted to believe that if I scrubbed my face, if I stood under the water long enough, I could wash it all away. Erase it. Pretend it never happened. But some things don't wash away. Some things stay. By the time my husband walked through the door, I was already in bed, my back turned, pretending to be asleep. I felt him move around the room, the sound of his belt unbuckling, his shoes hitting the floor. He sighed, the same tired sigh I had heard 100 times before. Long day, he muttered to himself. And I almost laughed. Long day? He had no idea. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to control my breathing, trying to stay still. But inside, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Would he notice? Would he feel the change in the air? Would he turn me over, look into my face, and see it written all over me? But he didn't. He just got into bed, pulled the covers up, and within minutes, he was asleep. Like nothing had happened. Like his wife wasn't lying inches away from him, completely shattered. The next morning, I did everything in my power to act normal. I moved through the house like a ghost, my hands steady, my voice even. Coffee. Breakfast. A quick kiss on my husband's cheek as he walked out the door, still glued to his phone, still oblivious. Nothing was different. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. I avoided my lil brother for as long as I could. I busied myself with chores, with errands, with anything that kept me from having to be alone in the same room with him. But by mid-afternoon, there was no avoiding it. I walked into the kitchen, and there he was, leaning against the counter, a cup of coffee in his hands. His eyes found mine immediately. And in that instant, I knew. He felt it too. The weight of it. The wrongness of it. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move past him, grabbing a glass of water like I didn't feel his gaze burning into me. You okay? His voice was careful, measured. Too careful. I nodded quickly. Yeah. Fine. A lie. A terrible, obvious lie. He didn't push. He just studied me for a long moment, like he was trying to read between the lines, trying to find the truth in what I wasn't saying. And then, finally, he nodded. Okay, that was it. Nothing else. No mention of what happened. No discussion. No apology. Just a silent understanding that we weren't going to talk about it. Because if we did, we wouldn't be able to stop. But the thing about secrets? They don't stay hidden. They seep into everything. They poison the air, twist the way you move, change the way you exist. And even though we weren't speaking about it, the tension between us was palpable. I noticed it in the way we avoided eye contact. In the way his hands twitched, like he wanted to reach for me but knew he couldn't. In the way my pulse quickened every time he walked into a room. We didn't touch. We didn't speak about that night. But every glance, every breath, every silence was screaming what we refused to say. Even my husband noticed something was off. Not that he thought anything of it, he just assumed I was being moody. You good? He asked one night, barely looking up from his laptop. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just tired. He grunted, already lost in whatever he was doing. Try to get some rest then. And that was it. That was all he said. No deeper questions. No lingering suspicions. Because why would he suspect anything? I was his wife. His loyal, devoted wife. The same wife he had ignored for years. The same wife he trusted without question. I should have felt relieved. I should have been grateful that he didn't notice. That I still had the chance to pretend that night had never happened. But instead, I felt sick. Because he should have noticed. He should have been able to look at me and know. He should have felt it in his gut, in his bones, the way I had changed overnight. But he didn't. Because he had stopped paying attention a long time ago. And somehow, that hurt more than the guilt. The days passed like that. Me, walking around with the weight of a secret I couldn't erase. Him, moving through the house like nothing had happened, but his eyes saying everything. My husband, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing right under his nose. And through it all, one terrifying thought pulsed in my mind. If it felt this impossible to forget, if I couldn't stop thinking about it, reliving it, craving it, then how long before it happened again? Because deep down, I already knew the answer. The mind is a dangerous place when you have something to hide. When you carry a secret like mine, it doesn't just sit there, quiet and still. It festers. It creeps into the cracks of your thoughts, settles into your bones, whispers to you in the dead of night. And the worst part? You start to listen. I told myself that what happened didn't count. That a kiss, just one kiss, wasn't enough to ruin a marriage. That I hadn't actually done anything wrong. That I could still fix this. But deep down, I knew. I knew that some betrayals don't require a bed, or tangled sheets, or skin on skin. Some betrayals happen in the heart first. And those? Those are the hardest to erase. I spent the next few days convincing myself that I was in control. That I could put up walls. That I could force myself to see him as my little brother again. That I could forget the way his lips felt against mine. That I could erase the way my body had responded. But the more I told myself I could stop it, the more I realized the truth. I didn't want to. I kept searching for something, anything to blame. Maybe it was my husband's fault. Maybe if he had paid more attention to me, if he had touched me, kissed me, looked at me like I was still his, I wouldn't have let someone else step into that space. Maybe if he had made me feel like I mattered, I wouldn't have craved that feeling somewhere else. Maybe if he had just seen me. But that was the thing about blame. It was easy. Too easy. Because no matter how much I wanted to put this on him, I was the one who made the choice. I was the one who let it happen. And no one else could carry that weight but me. Every time I looked at my little brother after that night, I felt like my whole body was at war with itself. The shame, the guilt, the regret. But then there was something else. Something I hated admitting. Something that scared me more than anything else. The longing. Because despite everything, despite the guilt, despite the fear, despite the fact that I knew I was playing with fire, I wanted more. And that was the real betrayal. Not the kiss. Not the secrets. Not even the lies I was telling my husband. It was the part of me that didn't want to stop. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror one night, gripping the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. Looking at my own reflection and not recognizing the woman staring back at me. Who was she? A cheater? A liar? Someone who had already made up her mind about what would happen next? Or someone who was still strong enough to stop this before it went too far? I wanted to believe I had a choice. That I could turn back. That I could bury this and never think about it again. But the truth? I had already crossed the line in my heart. And once you do that, the rest is just a matter of time. So now, I have to ask you. Do you think it's still cheating if nothing physical happens? Or is the real betrayal the moment you start wanting something you're not supposed to have? Because I already knew my answer. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. So now, I have to ask you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have pulled away sooner? Walked away before it even started? Would you have been strong enough to set the boundary and keep it there? Or would you have done what I did? Would you have let yourself get caught up in something that felt too good to stop? Something that made you feel alive after being numb for so long? I want to know. Have you ever been in a situation where a bond blurred the lines? Where right and wrong weren't so black and white anymore? Because I know some of you understand this. I know some of you have been in that same place, standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. So, tell me, do you think emotional infidelity is just as bad as physical? Or is it worse? Let's talk in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and the kind that leave you questioning everything, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because this story, it isn't over. Not yet. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this: loneliness is a dangerous thing. It makes you see love where there's only comfort. It makes you crave passion where there's only escape. It blinds you. It tricks you. And before you even realize it, you're somewhere you never thought you'd be. Before you let your heart wander. Before you let yourself fall into something you can't undo. Ask yourself, are you ready for the weight of regret? Because once you cross that line, once you let yourself taste what you were never meant to have, you don't get to go back.